Welcome to Raving Ryan. I'm your host, Ryan Anastasio. Today I have a very special guest, the Comptroller of Connecticut, Kevin Lembo. Kevin, how are you?
Good to see you, Ryan.
Yeah, I want to start off with a question about your career before you were Comptroller. Before you Comptroller, you served as the Deputy Comptroller and as other state positions. Can you tell us a little about your journey to Comptroller and some of the challenges you faced?
Sure. I'm really clear that no kid wakes up thinking I'm going to be the comptroller someday. It's not the kind of job that people aspire to, and I didn't aspire to it as well initially. So I came through the nonprofit world mostly, working on public health programs, working on trying to make sure people had access to long-term home care solutions when they were sick or older, and then got involved in politics, mostly because it was the early part of the AIDS epidemic, and I really cared about stuff that was happening and got myself engaged. And then it sort of took off from there. So in Connecticut, I was, you're right, assistant comptroller under Nancy Wyman, and then went on to become the state's first healthcare advocate, which allowed me to stand with patients and their families and advocate for them when their insurance company denied a claim for a specific kind of care.
Yeah, and as state comptroller, you oversee state spending, serve as Connecticut's fiscal guardian, and you work to help eliminate wasteful spending, strengthen budget transparency, deliver government service more efficiently, and address the state's health crisis. This is a very complicated job with lots of responsibilities. Can you tell us a little more about your responsibilities as comptroller?
Sure. So I have about 270 employees that report to me. So this just isn't a ceremonial job, as you point out in the introduction to the question. I pay all of the state's bills. I pay the state's employees. I purchase health care for 250,000 people. I administer the pension fund for our retirees. And then I have that other job, or that other title, the state's fiscal guardian. And you won't find it in statute or in the Constitution anywhere. It's sort of an unofficial title. But it's the one that's actually the hardest to do, because it means that even though we're elected in partisan elections, Democrats and Republicans, after the election, you have to run government in a way that's for all the people. And that means sometimes saying to your friends, your numbers are wrong. And then that doesn't always make them very happy.
Yeah, I want to talk about something that just happened in December. In December, you wrote a letter to the Mississippi-based Christian organization called the American Family Association, who was on Connecticut's state charitable list. And you asked about their policies on gays, lesbians, and other groups. The AFA responded by calling you out on a radio station, saying that call and email your office, and saying that you discard Christian beliefs. Your office received thousands of calls and emails, and some that went after you and your family. The AFA has just been removed from this list for violating state discrimination laws. Mr. Comptroller, can you tell us a little bit more about this thing that happened in December?
Sure, happy to. We got a complaint from one of our state employees who works for the Department of Environmental Protection and Energy. And he really just asked why this particular charity was on the list of approved charities for state employees to give through the state employee campaign. It's kind of like a United Way thing that we do with our employees. You pick a charity, check a box on how much you want to give, and then we take it right out of your paycheck and send it to the charity. So there's probably 800 charities in this book, and this one no one really paid much attention to. The reason the employee asked me about it was that he had seen some things they said around not allowing Muslims in the military and sort of the rights of gay people and a whole bunch of other things that led him to believe that it was almost impossible to have those views and also have a non-discrimination policy in their organization that doesn't discriminate. And it has to be a non-discrimination policy that reflects Connecticut laws, not Mississippi laws where they are. So we asked them to send us a copy of the letter. As you point out, they decided not to send us their policy. They decided not to do that. And about 18,000 emails right to my desktop. So you can imagine what that looks like as they're popping up on the screen. About 5,000 or 6,000 phone calls. They all but shut down our phone lines for about 2 days. Which made it impossible for our constituents and our consumers and customers that we're trying to serve to get through. So it was most unfortunate. Ultimately, they decided they weren't going to provide the information necessary to remain in the plan, and the committee that oversees the operation voted and removed them from the plan.
Yeah, and I want to move into some issues that are going around in the state. The deficit in the budget in Connecticut is a huge issue in the state currently. By the end of the fiscal year, you've projected that Connecticut will have a budget deficit of around $57 million. Mr. Comptroller, what do you think needs to get done to get out of this enormous deficit?
Sure. So first, an update. So we're taping this on the 1st of February, right?
Yes.
I think, as we're sitting here, and I just released new numbers today, so you're among the first to know, that we're actually going to show a small surplus for this fiscal year, and we can talk about why. It's mostly one-off revenue. It's not that the economy is really taking off and performing, but there is some unexpected revenue that's come into the state that moved us from deficit to surplus. What do we need to do? We got to grow the economy. I mean, it's really that simple. The state cannot tax its way or cut its way out of budget woes from year to year. You have to be growing an economy, being a good partner to businesses, to families, to municipalities, to the nonprofit community, and keeping your word matters a ton. So when you set realistic expectations, when you're really clear about what you're going to do and what others are going to do, it allows companies, businesses, for example, to plan around that. And as long as we don't keep changing the rules every day, it makes it a lot easier for them to get the job done. Now, that said, we have to do a ton of work around revamping the tax code, looking at the regulatory environment, trying to make sure that every household and every business in Connecticut has access to high-speed internet service, because that brings the kind of economy that builds on our strengths that already exist in Connecticut.
Yeah, and I want to move into talk about the pension program in Connecticut. Currently, the pension program in the state is contributing to this very large deficit. In a column in the Hartford Courant, you said that the pension crisis is too big for partisan warfare, and that the people need to take a careful look at this issue before taking sides. Can you tell us more about the pension crisis and how do you think it can be fixed?
Sure. So in the early 90s, Governor Weicker, who was governor at the time, set Connecticut on a payoff of what was debt in the pension fund. So when the state doesn't make its full payment, it's like your credit card. Like when you don't make the full payment or you get behind, suddenly it starts to spiral and you end up owing a lot more than you thought you would. Connecticut was sort of in that position in 1992. Governor Weicker said, here's my plan to pay it off. Everybody agreed, and they started to pay it off. Then in 1997, Governor Rowland, for some reason, decided that he was going to change that payoff formula and took his payment down, made it cheaper for him, and then put us on this escalating payment schedule, like a balloon mortgage, after he went out the door. So we're in the middle of that now. That number is growing at about $100 million a year. It's already a $1.5 billion item inside a $20 billion budget, so it's a big number as a percentage of the whole. So something clearly needs to be done.
Yeah, in the state legislature, Republicans have introduced a bill eliminating pensions for state legislators. What do you think of this?
It's a little hard because I don't know if they'll have the votes. It's always interesting to me that the same people who complain about the pension program in the state of Connecticut are not the first ones who are willing to give it up for themselves. So, let's some of that's a little bit of theater, and we'll just, set that aside for a second. But I think there is a real issue. Maybe legislators need to have their own pension plan if that's what they see fit to do. One of the problems, though, when you start taking groups out of the existing pension agreement is that suddenly you have fewer dollars coming into it. And when you have fewer new dollars coming in, then there isn't enough to support the outflow to our present retirees. It all sort of hangs together. So we'll see where that conversation goes, and we'll watch it closely.
Yeah, and back in another state issue, the infrastructure in Connecticut needs to be fixed a lot. Roads, bridges, and other things need to be repaired, which will cost the state millions of dollars. It has been proposed to add traffic tolls to the state of Connecticut. Have you talked about this with Governor Malloy and other state officials?
I've spoken with other state officials about it, met informally, I should say, with the House Chair of the Transportation Committee just over the weekend. They raised some important issues. So you can look at the toll issue and say, look, this is just the state trying to bring more money in, right, because we're in this precarious position. And that's partially true. But then when you go to the next step and say, okay, who's putting the most wear and tear on our roads? Who pays tolls in New York and Massachusetts and not in Connecticut? Is it fair that the people of Connecticut have to pay for all those cars, buses, and trucks that just use us as a pass-through to get between Massachusetts and New York or Rhode Island? So I think those are reasonable public policy conversations. My baseline is I'm not opposed to tolls. I would be concerned, though, that we make sure there's a provision for people who live in Connecticut but work over the state line. So, if you work in New York in Westchester County, for example, or you work up in Massachusetts or Rhode Island, the fact that you go back and forth across the border every day shouldn't disproportionately impact you versus the rest of us who just happen to live and work in the same state. So we'll see how the debate turns out.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the state legislature right now. This year there were lots of changes. The state Senate's at a tie right now. The state House is at a very close margin. This is closer than it's ever been in the past few years. What do you think of the state legislature being very close right now?
It certainly has changed the dynamic in the legislature. So I see at the committee level, because there's a whole bunch of committees inside the legislature, like the Transportation Committee and Education and some others. I see a different way that legislators across party lines are working with each other. So that's a good thing. They're meeting together, they're screening bills together, they're making joint decisions around what bills are going to be raised and what bills are not going to be raised. So that's all good stuff. The hard part, however, comes when the budget is unveiled, when this pension agreement hits the floor of the legislature, because that's when folks who, in this case, the Republicans haven't had sort of that power in the legislature, are really going to be forced to make some difficult decisions because now they've got the power to do it and the responsibility to do it.
Yeah, in the election of Donald Trump surprised many people across the state of Connecticut and the whole country. Were you surprised by the election of Donald Trump?
Nationally, I guess I was. Connecticut didn't vote for Trump, so we tend to be a little bit different than the country writ large. But I think there's some real lessons here. I think it's possible to look at the election results from last year and assume that it was a Trump effect that led to a split in the Senate and more seats for Republicans in the House. I'm not convinced that that's the case. Actually, Governor Malloy's approval ratings are so low in some of these districts that it sort of makes sense that they would be looking to flip party seats in those districts. When I pull back and I look at the whole phenomena together, I'm concerned about how this is going to go. The last 8 days or so haven't given me a ton of confidence in their ability to do the big work, but maybe they need to grow into it. So I'll give them a little bit of additional time. What I think is of concern is why did people make the choice that they did? Why did they go for Donald Trump, who was clearly someone who wanted to break up systems, blow it up, say and do all of those things that he said during the campaign? And I think there's a whole class of people, a group of people in Connecticut and in the nation who feel like their government doesn't think about them anymore, isn't concerned about what our kids are going to do when they graduate high school, isn't concerned about growing the economy, aren't concerned about fairness across, and spend a lot of time thinking about the top of the economic food chain and a lot of time thinking about the bottom of the economic food chain, but not thinking about the middle where most of us actually live, in that middle class.
Yeah, it's been a pretty hectic time in Washington, D.C. in the past few days. Donald Trump just initiated the Muslim ban and not the travel ban, actually, as I would say.
Right.
What do you make of the travel ban and Mr. Trump's other decisions that he's made?
I heard a Republican commentator call that his rollout of that ham-handed. I don't know if you're familiar with that image, but it's meant to be sort of like awkward and like they didn't quite get it right. And then I've heard some others say, well, they agree with the underlying principle underneath it, but they were concerned about the rollout.
Yeah.
I have a more fundamental disagreement about this. There is no indication that there was an immediate concern, right, that there was some intelligence that something was about to happen. You were going to seal the borders to protect the nation. That's a different kind of thing. I hear a lot of rationalization around, well, he promised this during the campaign, so he had to do it. That's not the measure of whether it's right or not, because candidates make promises during campaigns all the time. But great political leaders have said, you run for office in poetry, but you govern in prose, right? So the actual governing work is serious, sometimes slow. You got to really think it out. You got to vet these things through. They didn't do any of that. To say it's not a Muslim ban, I think strains credibility for them, because when you look at the countries that are targeted, when you look at the Christian exemption that's in there, when you look at who didn't get included and where their business ties are, all of that together makes for a very, I'll just call it suspicious decision about why they decided to go through. And you can see them backtracking every day since then. So there's outrage.
So would you call it a Muslim ban? Or would you
I would.
Okay.
I absolutely would. I would call it a Muslim travel ban. Yeah.
Okay. And I want to talk
And I
about...
wasn't correcting you. You're
Yeah.
just saying what's being said right now.
Yeah, and I want to talk about one of Donald Trump's cabinet nominees. Jeff Sessions is his nominee for Attorney General. He's been criticized by many people for discriminating against people while he was Alabama State Attorney General, including Senator Richard Blumenthal in the state of Connecticut. Are you concerned about Senator Jeff Sessions as the next Attorney General?
I'm concerned with Senator Sessions' ability to stand up to what is clearly a force of nature in the person of Donald Trump and the people around him.
Yeah.
You saw it play a little bit around the Muslim ban when they didn't like what the acting Attorney General said, and so they fired her.
Yeah.
The Attorney General is really not meant to do the president's bidding. The Attorney General is there to uphold the laws as written in the country. And sometimes that means telling a president, you can't do this. That's a hard thing to do under any circumstances, and I get the sense it's a little harder to do in the face of somebody like Donald Trump.
And what do you think of Donald Trump's other cabinet nominees, such as Rex Tillerson and Wilbur Ross?
Yeah, so Rex Tillerson seems to get a mixed bag. My first response was oil, Putin, that whole sort of narrative. But his answers seemed right in the hearing, and it looks like he's assured confirmation. So we'll see how that one goes. Wilbur Ross, I actually know. I worked with him years ago in New York. He is a creature of finance in the best possible sense of the word, but he goes in and he finds vulnerable companies and he breaks them apart and he sells off the pieces that are worth anything and he just like gets rid of the other pieces. So that's fine as a business model, as long as you always remember that there are real lives underneath all that. And the Commerce Secretary is really about building business, not to just build business, but really to make sure that people have, portfolios that are growing and jobs that are growing and all of that. Betsy DeVos, who's the education secretary nominee, I've got real concern there. I'm not a big charter school guy. I think we really need to recommit ourselves to public education. We just set up a haves and have-nots system sometimes with charters. So we'll see how that one goes. And I'm sure there's a long list, but those are the ones who come to mind.
Yeah, and Donald Trump says that he will repeal the Affordable Care Act and put in a new replacement plan. You oversee healthcare in Connecticut. How do you think the repeal of the ACA will affect people in Connecticut?
Yeah, it's a devastating loss if something doesn't come in that replaces it in some meaningful fashion. We've heard for a long time this idea of repeal and replace, and replace. And they've always got the repeal piece down flat. But when it comes to the replace, like with what question, it's always a little squishy to me.
Yeah, and you've expressed interest in running for governor in 2018. However, Governor Daniel Malloy can still run for a third term. Why are you interested in running for governor, and what do you think you can do to help the people of Connecticut as governor?
So haven't decided that I'm really interested in running governor. I'll be because the laws of Connecticut are very specific, and you got to be careful about not triggering a campaign. I'm considering it, but haven't made a final decision. The only way I would do it is if I thought I brought something to the table that didn't already exist in the mix of candidates that are already out there, and that I found that our ideas were somehow superior to the ones that were already on the table. And it's hard to be objective about that, but I think it's a question that needs to be asked. I don't think there's anybody who really thinks that Governor Malloy is going to seek a third term. Last election was rough. Approval ratings, as we've already mentioned, are low in many, many places. But if not him, then who is always the question. So if I got involved and I decided to run, the first step is an exploratory committee, which means you're sort of trying to figure out if you're actually going to proceed. And that would be about judging whether there's the support there to get it done, and also taking my ideas and seeing how people of the state respond to them. Because I may think they're great ideas, but if you don't agree or like them, then it's really sort of a nonsensical thing to pursue.
Yeah, and I'm going to finish up with some personal questions. Can you tell us like some of your hobbies that you have?
Hobbies. I'm a music guy. I love working around the house. I have a limited amount of carpentry, but more plumbing and electrical. So I like renovating and doing that kind of work. We travel a bit. When I can get some time away, really enjoy traveling. Our youngest son is singing in Dublin with his high school concert choir in April, so we're going to head over and listen to him sing at St. Pat's in Dublin. Like to travel and get out, meet new people, hear different perspectives. Actually, I think helps make us all better when you understand how the rest of the world thinks and how they think about us as a country. And beyond that, not a ton of time for other hobbies.
Yeah. And we asked this to everybody that we interview. Connecticut's very well known for its pizza restaurants. Do you have a favorite pizza restaurant in the state?
That's the question that gets everybody in trouble. So I'm not going to answer it. No, I'll answer it.
Okay.
I'm going to go modern.
Yeah.
I'm going to go modern.
And you have a favorite pizza there?
No, I'm pretty open. I'm not a meat eater. So I've got some limitations on which ones I pick. But a nice pure margarita or a clam or something like that, I'm in.
Yeah.
You?
I like Sally's. Yeah, pepperoni.
There you go.
Okay, Comptroller Lembo, I'd like to thank you for coming on. I'd also like to thank his communications director, Tara Downs, and my brother Sam, who's the executive producer. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching us. You go to ravingryan.com. You can like me on Facebook and Twitter, like Comptroller Lembo on Facebook and Twitter. And reporting for Raving Ryan, I'm Ryan Anastasio. I want to thank you for watching this video. I want to thank Sam Anastasio, my executive producer, Teplitsky and Company for letting us go to the interview, Tara Downs, communications director, and of course, Comptroller Kevin Lembo.